Hey, this is Maximus Confesses. I know I usually gear this channel to apologetics, but I wanted to make a video on the problem of induction. So I put together this PowerPoint presentation on the topic, but it's not completely separated from other topics on this channel because I usually go into classical metaphysics to discuss my apologetic. And here I want to offer a solution to the problem of induction based off of classical metaphysical understandings. Now, without further ado, let us commence to the Aristotelian solution to the problem of induction. One of the interesting topics around here for discussion regarding both science and logic is the problem of induction. For those of you who don't know what we mean by induction or its problem, induction works from the premise to the conclusion as follows. Premise 1. All emeralds we have seen are green. Conclusion, all emeralds are green. Here is the problem. How is such induction justified? If it is by induction working in the past, then aren't we just using induction to prove induction, which is hence circular? And of course, since we can't deduce any kind of validity for induction, aren't we kind of, well, stuck? And that's the main problem that we see. Also, how does it really follow that just because we've always observed something, that'll always continue to be as is? Could we not find some future purple emeralds? Well, that's the beginning of the problem, but there are more problems of induction. These are just the more basic problem of induction that were put forward by the great philosopher David Hume. Before going on to a solution to David Hume's problems of induction, I want to look at two other problems of induction. The first is Nelson Goodman's The New Riddle of Induction. The second is Carl Gustav Hempel's Raven Paradox. The New Riddle of Induction claims that induction is always underdetermined. Let's go back to the green emerald example. Let's form a secondary hypothesis that says all emeralds are GRU. But what does GRU mean? Well, X is GRU if and only if X is green until some random time Y in the future such that it turns blue. So given the nature of induction, what reason do we have to prefer green over GRU? Now granted, one could come up with something like Occam's razor, but at that point you're not really helping using induction. You're using Occam's razor. Now let's move on to the Raven Paradox. To illustrate the Raven Paradox, let's go back to our emeralds example once more. To say all emeralds are green is identical to saying all non-green things are not emeralds, by way of obversion. Obversion is essentially when you take the two terms and make them negative. So instead of saying green things, you say non-green things. Instead of saying emerald, you'd say not an emerald. And you take those two terms and you switch them around, which is always valid in logic, because the essential meaning doesn't differ. So in some sense, I have just verified the hypothesis all emeralds are green by looking at the world around me and finding non-green things and then seeing, oh, they're not emeralds. This would mean that one could be doing research on emeralds for science just by looking at non-emeralds all day. So there is just not one problem of induction, but a lot of problems with induction. Now, if you didn't follow along or have any more questions that weren't addressed, I will link some other sources below in the description bar. However, since we have that out of the way, we come to the meat of the video, how Aristotle could solve the issue or the problem of induction. This was a question asked and answered very well in an Aristotelian Account of Induction, Creating Something from Nothing by Louis Groarke. Aristotle uses and develops term logic in his posterior and prior analytics. I don't want to get into the specific differences, as there are a variety of logical systems that are used and have been developed by logicians over the centuries. However, since Aristotle utilizes a logic that is heavily tied into his metaphysics, Groarke develops a 5-level map of induction that characterizes induction as not a formal argument, but a movement of the mind from what is observed in particular instances to creating universal rules. The first part of the video will involve going into a step-by-step explanation of each level. The second part will show how the same problem of induction does not apply to Aristotle's system. The first level of Aristotle's induction is called induction proper. In just the normal activity of our minds in categorizing the world, we abstract necessary categories, concepts, essences, attributes, and principles. Such activity is fairly automatic and a necessary ingredient in human thought. The second level of induction notices patterns and similarities. This level is dubbed recognition. This is when we are made aware of our automatic cognitive responses that fit into the above categories in proper induction. For example, in induction proper, our minds operate as if contradictions do not exist, otherwise known as the law of non-contradiction, whereas in the recognition level, we can put things we notice into the world in distinct categories so not to contradict ourselves. Even though we might not be fully aware of the rule itself, we act as if the rule exists when we say this is different from that. The third level is called rigorous induction. This is where we discuss essential properties universal to all the objects in the specific category. This is the category of induction where the problem of induction surfaces, and the part I will get back to later in the video. This is the part I really want to focus on, so we're only going to give this a passing glance. The fourth level of induction is rhetorical induction. This is where we give analogies, examples, and arguments about consistency. This is where induction is taken to be and used as a form of argumentation, mostly to convince an interlocutor. The fifth and final level of induction is where we make probabilities, given the number of objects we have at our disposal to enumerate. This is statistical induction. The fourth and fifth levels are where we find ourselves looking at what is accidental to a subject rather than essential. While it is arguably essential that all men are mortal, being a man has nothing to do with why we end up bald. But what we can do is correlate the occurrences of baldness within human beings. Or, even better, and it's not attached to biology, so it would probably be far less controversial, would be where we're born. It doesn't matter where we're born, it doesn't affect that we are human. So, with these levels out of the way, let's go to the problem of induction as it pertains to rigorous induction. Induction, generally understood, is about going from the particular instance to the universal principle. It is not seen as distinct from deduction, but is rather a type of deduction. Deduction, as we usually see it, is the reverse or the opposite of induction, where you go from the universal principle to understand a particular case. However, here Groarke uses deduction to refer to a form of reasoning where, to quote him, the premises and the conclusion must be distinct, the conclusion must come about because of the premises, and the conclusion must follow necessarily from the premises. Here, the inductive argument is just as deductive as any that goes from the universal principle back to the particular case. So, how can we construct a syllogism that is inductive? It must have distinct premises and a conclusion. The conclusion must follow from the premises, and the premises cannot be true while the conclusion is false. Here is a syllogism that gets us from the particulars of observing green emeralds to the universal statement, all emeralds are green. The syllogism can be formulated as follows. All observed S's are P's, all observed S's are M's, all M's are the observed S's by conversion of the minor premise, therefore all M's are P's. Now, with that in mind, let's remove the letters and let's plug in the values for the letters. Considering that the subject under observation are green emeralds, and what we first notice is that they bear resemblance to other things in the green category, let's start by giving S the value of green emeralds, and P the predicate of green things. Hence, premise 1, all observed green emeralds are green things. Now, let's go on to the second premise where we go to the metaphysical principle, which is M, of what makes an emerald what it is. So, let's give M the value of emeralds. Thus, premise 2, all observed green emeralds are emeralds. Now, to say that green emeralds are emeralds is not groundbreaking. However, it's when we go into detail of what makes an emerald what it is, then it will make more sense. It's through examining the relationship between an emerald being green and an emerald being what it is. That is where we can assess how much those two things overlap. Once we've looked into that relationship, we can validate the next premise where we convert the two values as such. Now, our third premise is all emeralds are green emeralds. This is done by the conversion of the minor premise. Now, it doesn't necessarily follow that just because all S's are P's, that all P's are S's. For example, just because all men are mortal, it doesn't follow that all mortals are men. Dogs are also mortals. They will die out. However, it doesn't mean that it cannot convert. Just as we know, in the Dragon Ball Z universe anyway, that premise 1, all 7 Dragon Balls are that which is necessary for summoning Shenron, we also know that which is necessary for summoning Shenron are the 7 Dragon Balls, because we have independent justification for this. What we need is an independent justification for the conversion of the syllogism in the scenario of green emeralds. So what gives us this conversion in terms of emeralds? Well, citing Paleo-Biondi, Groarke echoes him in his own work. You can find it on page 116 to 117 in the book. And I quote, "An induction can be held to have gone through all particular instances, not because it has actually been enumerated every single instance, but because it has done so potentially by having acquired the cognition of the universal essence of the particulars being enumerated. The medieval-sounding interpretation begins in Aristotle." End quote. Once we grasp the essence of what makes an emerald, quote-unquote, what it is, we can speak of an emerald, and we can say that to speak of an emerald as being anything other than a green emerald leads to a faulty understanding of what the essence of an emerald is. But in any case, this leads us to the final conclusion, dun-da-da-da. All emeralds are green. It is by making these conversions that bypass the Humean problem of induction, since induction is now justified deductively. So, this leaves us with the other problems of induction that I mentioned earlier. Well, to address Goodman's new riddle of induction, he reduces it to little more than Cartesian skepticism, he meaning Groarke, which is itself unreasonable. He claims, and I quote, "We know that emeralds are green. Emeralds are biroles composed of aluminium, beryllium silicate, a transparent crystal lattice, containing chromium as an impurity. The host crystal is associated with an electric field that fixes the energy levels of the chromium electrons so that they can only absorb certain wavelengths of light, the crystal or Lagrange field effect. These electrons remove yellow, red, and blue light from sunshine, which is why emeralds look green. Could emeralds turn blue? Not without violating the laws of physics and chemistry. To produce blue light, the chromium electrons fixed in the orbitals by the electrical field of the aluminium beryllium silicate would have to absorb green, red, and yellow light and not absorb blue light. But these electrons fixed in the unoccupied orbital cannot undergo the energy changes with such chemical behaviors, or at least they cannot do so without the violation of the basic laws of physics. Of course, we can use Cartesian doubt to doubt all the laws of chemistry and physics, but so what? If we are unable to protect the laws of chemistry from Cartesian doubt, this is neither surprising nor devastating. As we have seen, Cartesian doubt erodes epistemological commitment to anything and everything." End quote. I would first like to apologize for screwing up any chemistry words that I mispronounced, but let's move on. Now, I can anticipate that some might claim that the laws themselves rely upon some kind of induction, but the question from Goodman is not about the validity of induction, unlike Hume, but how we can know which inductive claims are true given the induction is going to be able to support two distinct conclusions. The problem is that Goodman, following Hume, is still seeing induction as enumeration, counting the members or instances of emeralds, not as finding more fundamental rules which conform or justify the conversion of the third premise. Further, Doubting the laws of physics and chemistry would lead to Cartesian doubt, a method that can call into question anything. The last problem, the paradox of the raven, does not apply. Why? It is simply a non sequitur that identifying a bunch of non-black things, or in the case of the green emeralds, non-green things, entails or helps us in determining if emeralds themselves have to be green. To quote Groarke, on an Aristotelian account, by contrast, the observation that a white shoe is not a crow is truly a non sequitur. It has nothing to do with what induction and science are generally about. If we observe the world carefully, we can use our intellect to see what must be the case. This is, in the first instance, what induction is about. When we understand what things are, we can understand why things are the way they are. The all-important question is what? Observing that a white shoe is not a crow cannot help us to understand what a crow is. It cannot help us to understand what makes the crow's feathers black. It cannot help us understand what accounts for the transmission of like traits from parents to fledgling. So this true observation has no inductive value. It has no inductive value not because it is false, but because it is beside the point. Return to the four-object universe. Aristotle would think that the observation that the white shoe is not a crow is unhelpful. Even in this kind of universe, it would not constitute a momentous advance in knowledge. Adding up samples may be a prelude to scientific discovery, but it is not what science really is about. The point is not to determine how many crows are black, but to understand why crows are black. End quote. Or to put it in a nice summation, and relevant to the emerald example, we don't learn about emeralds from observing things unrelated to emeralds. Now, to kind of sum up what Groarke is saying, let's go back to the syllogism and replace raven and black with emerald and green. Premise 1. All observed green emeralds are green things. Premise 2. All observed green emeralds are emeralds. Premise 3. All emeralds are green emeralds, by conversion of the minor premise. And our conclusion, all emeralds are green things, or green. To give a proper inversion while we switch things up, we're going to have to make sure it translates and works to all the premises. Premise 1. All observed non-green things are non-emeralds. Premise 2. All observed non-emeralds are non-green emeralds. So far, so good. But the problem comes in when we invert or convert the third premise and try to make the inversion stack up. Premise 3. All observed non-green emeralds are non-emeralds. How is this conversion given independent justification? It doesn't follow necessarily from the rules of logic, nor does going around observing just anything which isn't a non-green emerald going to help, unless it's related to the nature of an actual emerald, like the mythical blue emerald. So, yeah, it doesn't work here, and for good reason. So, with this video wrapped up, I hope that a possible Aristotelian solution might inspire some to look into the old philosopher. More so, I would also encourage looking up Louis Groarke's fantastic book. It was a real eye-opener for me. I enjoyed delving into it. The Amazon link will be provided below, and everyone, have a good day.